Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And in all transparency, Dr. Lisa, it's been a while since we sat down at the microphone, right?
Yes, it has. Hi, everyone. Lisa Ringerfield, she, hers. We have been traveling all over the world and we're still climbing back to normality here.
Crawling, not even climbing for me. I think I'm crawling. Uh, yeah. But get us kicked off with our word of the week for today, Dr. Lisa.
Alrighty, so it's really more of a concept, I think. We're going to talk a little bit about Christian nationalism. You may have heard this term. This concept has been in the news a lot and is gaining a lot of attention, but we thought it might be valuable to define it. So PBS describes this as a concept that is built around the idea that Christians are called to a new transformation or reformation of the United States. These are Christians who want to revolutionize the way that our country looks and to make it great again in terms of being a Christian nation. So, what does that actually mean? That means that folks who identify as Christian nationalists, I think, tend to be predominantly white, tend to be associated with the evangelical Christian faith, and they believe that there is no separation of church and state. So the whole kind of founding principle in the United States that those two should be separate, they do not believe that to be true. They believe that the Bible, or more broadly, Christian principles, should be embedded in law and policy. So, law and policy should not exist absent that, right? So, biblical teaching should inform that. There should be a state religion. That should be Christianity, no other religions. All education should be derived from the Bible, derived from Christian beliefs. And then there's this component of we are fighting a good versus evil fight, and we are the foot soldiers of God, and therefore what we do is righteous. So that's kind of the tenets there of Christian nationalism, and it's not an insignificant movement in the United States. You are probably familiar with the Lauren Boeberts, Marjorie Taylor Greenes, and other folks across the United States who are both in locally elected positions and nationally elected positions who subscribe to this philosophy. Anything you want to add, given your extensive history and background in religion, Shaunna?
Ooh, ooh, ooh. And extensive history and background living in Southern Virginia under the umbrella and shadow of the Falwell family, the Liberty University campus, and that area of the world. That most people don't know the small town that I grew up in, but as soon as they hear some of those names, they know exactly who I'm speaking of. And so I've witnessed a lot of this growing up, uh, understood a lot of it growing up, thought it was kind of interesting growing up, yet I'm still grappling with the separation of church and state that I was taught in school, yet did not see lived out. And so, yeah, I've had quite a few years of this. And I think that's for another whole podcast entirely, but I do think it segues in nicely into some of the topics that we're going to talk about today. But yes, grapple with that as we continue
Mm-hmm.
to slide into, I think we're already in election season, but sliding into the election in November. You will hear more of that phrase forthcoming, right? More of that. Scary to
Yeah,
me
yeah,
as a
absolutely.
Christian, but still very realistic, given that, oh, I just know the privilege that Christianity flexes on a regular basis. And this is just one form of
Mm-hmm.
several
Mm-hmm.
privileges that Christianity flexes. So there you have it. But thank you for giving the definition, because a lot
Yeah,
of people
yeah.
probably have not heard of the mix of the two, both Christianity and nationalism. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
let me slide us into phase one. Phase one. So, Lisa, I think it's very interesting. And I know this is something that has been kind of talked about, especially in workplaces across the country for many, many years, but it has now become I don't want to say theory, a phrase, a term that has been juxtaposed against all of the DEI work that you and I have committed ourselves to for many, many years. And it's this concept of MEI, merit, excellence, and intelligence, right? Um, oh, I don't even like saying the name Elon Musk, but here we are, Lisa. Like I'm trying to make my mouth say his name, and it's hard to even do it right. But MEI, merit, excellence, and intelligence, is this buzzword that really is built upon this myopic, narrowly formed, somewhat disingenuous point of view that merit should cure all, you know, work hard enough, and all of that. And it's frustrating because, from my perspective, Lisa, you and I, we have heard this for many, many years, how diversity actually has been conflated against merit, meaning that we don't need diversity because if everybody works hard enough, then let the chips fall where they may. And it's like bullshit, bullshit. I know enough people of color that have worked their entire lives. Like if it was based on working hard, then all of them would be billionaires. All of them would be well off. All of them would be connected to this capitalistic understanding of success and meritocracy. And so I appreciate how this MEI phrase is being come up because they're grasping at straws here. There's like almost no way to debate that DEI from a metric perspective works for organizations, but yet they still try to do it by saying that if everybody works hard enough, we'll be all right. I have not seen that to be true. It ends up stereotyping a lot of people as if they don't work hard. And what I think gets really interesting is that it's, again, hurting the very same people over and over again. The same people we talk about on this podcast, almost every podcast: women, people of color, the folks that are already light years behind based on generational history and constructs of exclusion. We're using, it's almost like the same outcome, new phrasing, right? Women and people of color are going to be left behind, but let's make up a new reason as to why they're going to be left behind because they didn't work hard enough, because what have you. I'm like, you can hear that from you, Elon, when your background tells me that it's questionable how hard you've worked for what you have. So if we're talking about working hard, it doesn't hold much water. So we have that MEI phrasing going on. And then we got SHRM over here acting a fool, Lisa. SHRM has decided to exclude equity from their D, E, and I strategy, which I can get into this much more, Lisa, but that all together, especially when SHRM is one of the leading voices for workplace human resources. And then let's add a little bit more to it. CNN, who has been respected by lots of folks across the spectrum of political approaches, ideology, and thought, they have disbanded their DEI team. So, Lisa, help me to make sense of all three of these: the MEI, the equity drop, the DEI dismantled. Did we not predict much of this happening back in 2020? Did we predict this?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've talked a little bit about this on and off on this podcast, right? The ways in which those commitments around inclusion and equity inside and outside of the workplace have kind of fallen by the wayside because it's no longer vogue, I guess. But they're all connected, right? So CNN is essentially saying we're not disbanding our race and equality journalism unit.
Right, right.
We are integrating it into all of CNN's work, right? And then SHRM, which used to stand for something and now they just go by SHRM, I think, is like, we are going to be inclusion forward, right? Like we are going to be inclusive of everybody. So we don't really need the equity part because equity is folded under inclusion, right? Which is stupid because you can't have inclusion without equity. So like equity comes before inclusion if we're going to create some kind of hierarchy, right? And equity is the biggest issue in workplaces. So you've got CNN saying we're integrating, race and equality into everything. We've got SHRM saying we're integrating equity into inclusion, which just tells me they're just going to disappear, right? And then with this merit, excellence, and intelligence buzzword that you're talking about from Elon Musk, you know what that made me think of is I just finished reading this book called They Came for the Schools, which is by Mike
Oh,
Hicksenbaugh, who is a Washington Post journalist. I think he's a journalist. He might not be a Washington Post journalist. But he basically has talked about how the ways in which, in the wake of George Floyd's murder and, you know, Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, this school district in Texas, oh, in addition to some racist behavior that became public, wanted to implement a diversity plan. Anyway, backlash ensued, right? And then it kind of like folds into all of the book banning that we've already talked about. But the idea that in school, we should not be talking about race. We should be colorblind because colorblindness is a basic principle of the United States. We do not judge people by the color of their skin, but rather the content of their character. If that phrasing sounds familiar to you, that has been co-opted by the right as a means to talk about merit and excellence, right? Like, this is about intelligence. This is about merit. Like you said, this is about working hard. And so you're seeing it happen in the workplace, but you're also seeing it happen in the schools, right? That book was just terrifying, FYI. Like, it took me quite a while to get through it because I was so angry and terrified. But it's all this way. Everything you just outlined here, Shaunna, is just this way of a white majority, and in many cases a white male majority, sidestepping the reality that if everyone was beginning from the same place, sure, merit makes sense. We are not all beginning from the same place because it's
that's
not
right.
equitable,
That's right.
right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's a great opportunity to stay in denial. I mean, we've seen the Chief Justice of this country start from that place of saying that huge if. Like when you said if, I'm like, oh my God, that's the biggest if I've ever heard in life because we know it's not true. And so given that, again, if we're all starting from the same place, I would love for those things to be true. However, that if is not true. We don't start from the same place. So therefore, we need to think strategically about if, which is another big if, we want the people who have been left behind to be able to catch up. But what this country is telling us, based on all three of these particular areas, is that no, we don't want women to catch up. We don't want people of color to catch up. It's something I've shared with you before, Lisa, around politicians, including President Biden, who I voted for personally, saying that this is not who we are as a country, when people like you and I, who have been in the trenches for a very long, will say, no, 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 sir. No, Mr. President, this is exactly who we are. It's exactly who we are. It may not be who some of us want to be, but it is who we are historically. And so, given that, you know, again, I feel like it's again the same issue dressed up differently. It's the same issue dressed up differently with different words, different phrases, in order to again avoid the strategic head-on work of helping people to catch up that have been historically left behind because it inconveniences the people who are already ahead. So we're just not going to do it. We're just going to say work harder and it's your fault, which then goes back, Lisa, into some of the systems thinking that we've talked about before on this podcast, where we've talked about it about race, gender. We've even talked about it concerning self-care. It is easier to blame Lisa for not being where we think she should be alongside the white man than it is to say, system, you need to be completely obliterated and we need to rebuild it, because actually there's nothing wrong with hardworking, smart, brilliant Lisa. There is something very wrong with the systems that we placed around that have made it very clear that we do not want her to be successful, whatever success looks like, right? So, I think it's a great cop out. I would just rather folks like Elon Musk to say, I'm far ahead, na 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 boo boo. I don't care if you catch up with me and keep it moving. I would just rather him just not make these statements, right? Because we know what it means, and it is a lot of posturing. I would just rather you not say anything. Stay ahead, because
Yeah.
that's what you're going to do anyway. But don't, it feels like, probably is, Lisa, you please affirm me on this
Mm-hmm.
or not. Every time language gets switched up and changed like this, especially from Elon Musk or someone similar to him in a position of power with lots of money in the bank, uh, it feels like gaslighting of an entire country. Like, you
Yeah.
can't make me
Yeah.
believe that pay equity should exist if women and people of color work harder, because we already do work hard. We already do sacrifice tons of things. We already
Right.
do excel
Yeah.
even in the face of challenges, but yet you're saying it's based on working hard. That math is not mathing is all at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other piece, it's this, I think you said this earlier, but I want to say it more directly, right? This idea that if your workforce or your school is racially or gender diverse, the people who are in the minorities, so the racial minorities, the gender minorities, didn't get there through merit or intelligence or excellence, right? They got there because they're a quote unquote diversity hire or diversity
Right.
recruit. So this
Right.
idea that to have a diverse group of people in any organization, if you're not a white man, then you somehow got this helping hand because you're not good enough. So that is what this is about, right? And so SHRM taking equity out of their strategy and putting inclusion. I think someone said this on LinkedIn. It's really about because white men felt like they were being left out, right? And that,
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
if you feel privileged and entitled to something and then we're trying to create a bigger tent so that more people have access to that something, then you feel like you're being discriminated against, right? So let's go inclusion so everyone feels included. It's just like giving everyone an effing medal, right? Like, here, white
Right.
men, you're
Right.
going to get a medal too, right? Like, that's what it feels like. And then the other thing I think SHRM had said was that, diversity, equity, and inclusion is divisive, or it hasn't been, they haven't been, strategies haven't been implemented properly. That's not
Yeah.
true either. You're
Right.
just responding to pushback from people who feel like their privilege is being taken away,
That's
right?
right.
So
That's
it's not
right.
the programs are not the problem. Yeah.
Right,
Um,
right. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And here's the
Mm-hmm.
thing, and I know this, put your assessment hat on as well. DEI programs have often been one of two things, I would suggest, Lisa. They either were so undervalued that even if they were successful, no one wanted to invest the money or the expertise in assessing the extent to which they were successful, or it was absolutely successful, but we don't want to share that data. So which one do you want? Like, that frustrates me, where, they're basically saying, oh, they didn't work. No, no, no. Even at worst, you don't have enough data to prove whether it worked or not, because you didn't want to make that investment because it wasn't a priority to your organization. Right. So, even with that, I'm like, oh, that's a crook to me. So that piece entirely. And going back to your point too, around the merit piece, and merit, gaslighting, I brought up a number of different words here. Another one that I would suggest to Lisa, you and I have talked about this before. My good friend Alex says all the time, um, the imposters rarely have the syndrome. That's one of the phrases that he's coined, and I love that phrase because, to be honest with you, Lisa, there's been way too many offices, committees, task forces, organizations that I walked into as a Black woman, where I had convinced myself that, hey, I'm lucky to be here. I got in here. Let me make the best of it when I get in here. I'm going to do my level best job. And I walk into those rooms with those white people, usually mostly white men, and I literally can mop the floor with them intellectually, and for whatever I didn't have as far as expertise in that area, with hard work. So you tell me, even walking in the door, assuming I wasn't qualified, I was still overqualified, because some of the stuff I brought up, they couldn't even have an intelligent conversation with me because they didn't even know where to start. So, and I don't even want to say that. I want to say that I walked into rooms where people were equally qualified and people had the skill sets, but that has not been my experience, Lisa. Told you this before, how many times I've gone into a business think tank or whatever it was, and I'm thinking, oh, I got a lot to learn from these people when I walk in because I've got all these questions. And I walk in the door and I find out, no, I'm not perfect. Obviously, my organization is not perfect, but I'm light years ahead of where I thought everyone else would be. It's not merit. So yeah,
Right.
I just think it's
Yeah.
very fascinating that we keep seeing the same story wrapped up in new language. Same story.
Yeah.
Uncomfortable white folks that don't want to be
Yeah.
uncomfortable, and so they're choosing to blame individuals rather than systems. Same song,
Yeah.
different day.
Yeah. White men get to be in that position of leadership because of merit, excellence, and intelligence. Black women only get to be in those positions of leadership because they're a diversity hire, right? Yeah. Like the
Bingo.
yeah. So merit, excellence, and intelligence just filters out everyone who's not a white dude. Yeah, it's so messed
Hello.
up. Anyway,
Exactly.
I feel
Exactly.
like you and I could like go on, and I'm like getting more irate as I think about this. But let's shift
Right,
gears to
right,
phase two,
right, right,
which
right.
might also make your blood boil. So this, some of you may have seen in the last couple of weeks, there was some news related to a research report that had been released related to some a discovery that arsenic and lead, among other metals, were found in tampons. Right. So it's 2024, and these products had not previously been tested for these kind of toxins, and so now we're just learning this. I will say that the levels that were found in the tampons, both organic and non-organic, were low. But whether or not over the period of a woman's lifetime or a person who uses tampons lifetime, the low amount of these toxic metals in them, whether that is absorbed into the body and over the time has a cumulative effect. That is unclear because what a surprise, Shaunna, there has been no research on that, right? So we've got
Called
two
it. I
things. We've
called
got
it, y'all.
one, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like there's shit that shouldn't be in tampons. And two, there's no research to know whether the shit that is in tampons that shouldn't be there is harming women or people who use tampons over the course of their life, right? Because it's low enough that like a single tampon wouldn't likely have any effect. But does it build over time, and do our bodies absorb it? That's the unknown piece. So like, I mean, it's uneffing believable. I mean, it's not, it's absolutely believable because women's health is unimportant and women's menstruation is barely talked about. We're just starting to talk about that stuff now.
So okay, so let's
Yeah.
get into it because Lisa, you know how much emphasis I've given to period poverty, and I feel a certain way about menstruating people not having the supplies and things they need. I'm almost like obsessive about it, right? And so with that, what is again infuriating yet not surprising, we have two major issues here: menstruating folks that don't have the supplies that they need in order to stay sanitary, stay safe, etc. And then for those who do have them, it might be killing us. How about that? One of the two, right? Like pick a struggle. Are you serious? What I think is very interesting too, Lisa, is that, to your great point, we don't know how far reaching this is because ask any menstruating person how many tampons they may use in a cycle, how long their cycle may be, how long they've been menstruating. Me personally, I've been menstruating since I was 16 years old. Happy birthday to me when I turned 16. Like years, decades of absorption in the body. And then, God forbid, someone turn up with, something that shortens their lives and we're all acting shocked. Why should we, right? Like I think about, and I know this is just one element of many, but thinking about whether it's tampons, whether it's panty liners for or women of color in particular. We've already had the conversation about hair products for Black women, straighteners for Black women. Like, I'm thinking to myself, every single product that I've used over my lifetime that wasn't tested appropriately and wasn't labeled appropriately that could now shorten my life with me and my kids. That pisses me off, really. Now, some things, and I'm not taking personal responsibility off of things. Yeah, there are some things that we all do that we're like, that wasn't too smart. Okay. But again, going back to your great point of no systemic thinking. Let's create this product that menstruating people are asking for. We don't really care about the levels of XYZ, and just let them use it and we'll figure it out decades down the road. If then. Like, I'm almost like, did a whistleblower say something like, we need to test this to see what's going on? And then when they finally did, this is what they discovered. Like, Lisa and I just talked
Yeah, I
about
don't know.
previously about another situation where not being forthcoming with information. I am interested to find out, were they forthcoming with the testing of this information, or did a woman or a menstruating person say, hey, this is one of the few products where I don't have any long-term data or information about how it's affecting me and other menstruating people's bodies. Don't you think we should do some research on it? And then in my mind, I'm seeing a frustrated white man go, okay, fine, let's just do some testing and see what happens. And then lo and behold, we find out that it's killing folks. That's exhausting. That's exhausting.
Yeah.
That's the life of women and other
Mm-hmm.
excluded people. It's frustrating. 16 different metals in tampons
Mm-hmm.
sold in the US and Europe seems like a lot to me, Lisa. Ridiculous. Ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to stress that there's no direct evidence that it does kill people. I think the point is that it is unknown what, if any, harm it would do to folks. But I think it was a group of women researchers at a university that
Oh,
did this.
good.
So this is not
Good.
research and development that's coming from the companies, the big companies, like, what is that, like GlaxoSmithKline or whatever, like those big ones that
Oh, yeah,
make
yeah.
the tampons. They
Mm-hmm.
have not, or maybe they have done internal research on this and then just never published the results, right? I don't know
That
that, but
is
this, I
very
think this
true.
is happening. This is disconnected from the companies that are making the tampons. And you think organic is going to be better, but it isn't necessarily.
Not
And it's not
necessarily,
clear
right?
how it's getting in there, right? Like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like it's
Mm-hmm.
not sure if it's like the process of making the tampons or if it's the cotton, like where it, at what point in that process are these 16 metals getting into it. That's unknown too, right? So it's,
Yeah.
yeah, like we're an afterthought, right? I mean, I'm sure, I can only imagine the number of women focused products that have not had
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
appropriate testing to determine whether there's any short-term or long-term harm. I mean, they rarely test drugs on women.
That's
It
right.
wasn't
That's
until like
right.
the 1970s, I think, that women were required to be in clinical trials. Like there was a period of
Mm-hmm.
time where
Well,
you didn't have to include women.
that's right. That's
What?
right. That's right. Exactly. Well, here's the thing. So this study from UC Berkeley School of Public Health, what they're saying here is that the contamination of the soil where the cotton grows is the problem, or could be the problem, because it contains mercury, lead, cadmium, various metals that are literally in the soil. And so here we go back again, Lisa, to our social determinants of health piece, where our environment, so everyone that thinks they're not an environmentalist, and if you use a tampon, guess what? You are. Or at least you need to consider being one, because literally the soil that the cotton grows out of is the problem. Interesting, right? And to your great point around the companies that are producing the tampons, I don't even know. I don't know what to say. I mean, should there be the possibility of hydroponic cotton, or, oh, I'm just saying, how do we, if we know the soil is the problem, which I'm sure they're still trying to figure that out, but if we know that soil can be a major problem, how do we avoid growing cotton or product in soil? Like, all that's environment based. So, oh, This is like the angry
Yeah.
emoji for this entire podcast right now, okay, Lisa? Because this is ridiculous. Ugh, and it freaks me out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but it costs money to do the research and development to determine a safer
That's
way
right.
to create these products.
That's
And
right.
women are not, it's not worth it, right? I mean,
Yeah, because
that's the calculation that I think is probably happening. Yeah.
of course,
Hmm.
even though, what is it, 100 million cisgender women use tampons, but that's not enough to do the R&D. Again, it's not,
I
it
mean,
goes back to what we say before.
yeah,
It's not about the majority in regard to number. It's about the majority in regard to power.
right, right. I mean, and maybe this R&D has been done. I don't know. Like you and I are just
Hmm.
kind of riffing off of this at the moment because it's very frustrating. But if the companies have done the work, they have not been very expedient in publicizing the results, right? Or talking
Hmm.
about how they're trying to make it safer. I mean, that
Mm,
I haven't heard anything about that. So
not at all. Not at all. Yeah. No, having the data in front of you and then doing something with it are two completely different things. So yeah, you're right. You're right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh
All right.
goodness. I don't know if I can get into phase 3 without. I need to cool down. Let me cool down. All right.
Little cleanse, a little moment of cleanse.
A woosah moment, like Bad Boys, woosah moment. Phase 3, Lisa. I am well documented on how I feel about this topic, but I want some perspective from you as well. You may agree or you may disagree the same way I do, but for different reasons. So let's bat it around a little bit. But look, Louisiana, why? 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 I am a Christian asking Louisiana, why would you require the Ten Commandments to be displayed in all of your classrooms? Right. And this warped understanding that Christianity is part of the US founding, its founding fathers' perspectives, Ten Commandments being the basis of a lot of laws here in the US, and wanting to make this connection blatant for children in the US. This is very problematic for me for a number of different reasons. One of which is, I've posted about this before on my social media. Let's say we go with the very problematic US founding fathers story. A number of US presidents were born and raised in Virginia. Some of the founding fathers also born and raised in Virginia. And there is documented evidence of these gentlemen who I am not fond of, but they still did not base all of their thinking off of Christianity. I mean, are you serious? I mean, I've been to Monticello many, many times as a kid and then also again as an adult. And they have been very clear about all of the holy texts that were there that Thomas Jefferson used for his thinking. As much as I don't like him, okay, that's still the fact of the matter. So some of these Christian narrative stories that we've connected with our US experience, they are literal fabrications. Even people that have disdain for these founding fathers will still say that what you think is not true about the tightly connected understanding of Christianity with the United States and its founding. It's just simply not documented. It's not true. Then we got Oklahoma State Superintendent Ryan Walters, who issues this memo that says that the Bible should be integrated into all subjects. Immediate and strict compliance is expected. Oh, interesting. Cannot wait to see how that happens because let me be clear. In case y'all forgot, all teachers are not Christians. Even amongst those that are Christians are not well versed in Holy Writ on any subject, much less being able to actually teach it on the level of K through 12. This is impossible. It's like telling me to fly to the moon right now, Lisa. It's just not possible, right? I'm not getting it. And so I'm grateful that the AG came back and said that, he just doesn't have any legal authority to require that. Um, but just the fact that you thought that that could happen, that's interesting to me. And so, Lisa, I'm at a place now where I'm like, you know what? I love my particular church that I worship with. It's called the Open Church. And we've had conversations similar to this about how Christianity runs amok and how it is wielded. And again, my concern, remember, y'all, I'm from Southern Virginia. I still have family, friends, loved ones that are still there that were applauding the Ten Commandments being hung in classrooms. And they are mostly coming from the perspective, again, that Christianity is it, and there is no other perspective or other religion or other way of life. It is the assumption that you're Christian or you're heathen. One of the two, pick one. And I'm like, hold up. What I've said from the very beginning is that Christianity should not and does not have a monopoly on this country. But apparently, these folks think it does. All this stuff is highly problematic. Highly problematic.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what is being teed up here is a challenge that will rise to the Supreme Court because back in the 60s, I think it was 62 or 63, was the famous case that said you cannot have school prayer, right? You cannot make people do school prayer because any kind of entanglement between religion and public education would be a violation of the First Amendment Establishment Clause. And that has been a thorn in the side of many Christians, particularly the Christian nationalist group, for decades, right? And then you had 2 years ago, you had the Kennedy, I always get this backwards, Bremerton School District versus Kennedy, or Kennedy, Bremerton, look it up. I forget exactly what it is, but essentially the Supreme Court said, yeah, it's totally fine for the coach to go onto the field after a football game, high school football game, take a knee and pray in the middle of the field. That's completely acceptable, right? It's a much more complicated case, and the majority opinion. Actually, it's not a complicated case, but the majority opinion just omitted a whole bunch of facts. Like, it's pretty bad, and students had said they felt pressured, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so that was a gateway, right? And so now I think one of these these issues, because they're getting challenged in court, but this Ten Commandment thing in Louisiana is probably going to work its way up to the Supreme Court, and you have a Supreme Court that is very, very pro freedom of religion if the religion is Christianity.
It's Christian. That's
not, right. Yes, freedom of religion if it is Islam, Judaism, Baha'i, right, Hindu, other religions. No, right, because so we'll see here, but the argument, Shaunna, that you're making is not the one that folks who are advocating for these policies are making. They believe
That's right.
like that there is no distinction between the establishment of the United States and Christianity. But what's
That's
so
right.
interesting to me, right, from a historical perspective, is that Europeans came to, a lot of English and Scottish and Irish and Welsh came to the United States because of religious persecution there, where the United Kingdom, as it was then, kept flip-flopping back between Protestantism and Catholicism, right? And a lot of people lost their lives, and so they left, came here, and then you're just essentially doing exactly the same thing. I mean, that's why that's the point of the Establishment Clause. We are not going to establish a state religion because we do not want that level of manipulation and persecution that happens when the state just decides what the religion is going to be.
That's right. That's right.
I don't understand how it just seems on its face, displaying the Ten Commandments, requiring that in every classroom, how that's not a violation of the Establishment Clause.
That's right. That's right. Well, and again, basing this on the history of this country, all of you, I encourage you to come here to the Museum of the Bible here in Washington, D.C., and you will see how the Bible has been manipulated and used in ways to control particular groups. Prime example, what's called the slave Bible, or it's official term is called parts of the Holy Bible. But basically, there were selections of the Bible that were included and excluded specifically for Negro slaves. Some that came from British West India Islands, all that area in the early 1800s, that specifically excluded phrases of either any type of rebellion or anything about liberation. Interesting. We founded a whole freaking country on liberty, but we don't want certain people to have it, right? So when you say that you want a Bible to be included or any portion of a Bible to be included, it's frustrating to me because there are way too many passages in the Bible that, if warped, people will make you think that it's divisive. So, prime example, we talk about this all the time in DEI work, that even having the conversation about DEI is divisive, right? But then you have passages like Galatians where it talks about there is neither Jew nor Greek, nor bond nor free. All of that, there's neither male nor female. Interesting. You want to exclude that from a Bible that prevents folks from rebelling or having liberty. You particularly pulled that language because you thought it was going to be divisive because you don't want people to realize that they're not free. Like, this form of theology is extremely frustrating to me on multiple levels, but the manipulation that is being thrown out there is problematic for me. I'm not going to be that person that's pro-Christian and anti everyone else. And on top of that, Lisa, we got other problems in our schools, especially public schools, that are not in alignment. So if you're going to put the 10 commandments up there, I'm going to need you to feed all those damn kids that you don't want to feed with free lunches. I want you to pay those teachers what they're worth and more. I want you to make sure that they have benefits. Oh, yep. And I also want you to forgive all those daggone school loans for all the education they got to educate your kids, not on religion, but on everything else. It's not in alignment. None of it's in alignment. And so for me, it's highly problematic because, number one, Christianity is not the only or even the primary religion in this country. And secondly, if you are going to push that, then push it from beginning to end. Beginning to end. Feed those damn kids. Pay the teachers. Pay everybody. But this is highly problematic for me. And again, for those of us who are not in agreement with 10 commandments being hung or prayer in schools and all that, I'll speak for myself and then other folks can chime in that speak the same Christianity language that I speak. I'm not anti 10 commandment and I'm also not anti prayer. I am pro 10 commandment and I am pro prayer, but practically, not systemically. Meaning that the 10 commandments that I read and the ones that they want to post are all the one also the ones that I want to live by. And I don't see that playing out in the world around me. When it comes to prayer, I'm not for prayer in school. Do not interpret that as in Shaunna says don't pray in school. What I'm saying is I don't need a damn law for my kids to pray over their test when they know it's going to be a tough math exam or a math test. I don't need an adult leading them into prayer because they know how to do it and I've taught them how to do so, and they don't need your permission to pray. So all of that, I am anti-systematizing one religion, especially Christianity. If we're not going to include everyone, then let's not do it. But to think that, some of the people that I see that are the most adamant about 10 commandments in school and prayer in schools, I'm thinking to myself, from a Christian perspective, from someone that studied theology, that's a discipleship issue to me. I don't need schools to teach my kids how to pray and teach them the 10 commandments because I do it at the house. I don't need that systematized. And the same should be for other religions as well, so that we have all our kids show up and they're tolerant, humble, and they're also worldly because they know that other people will do things different ways. I'm not seeing that. I'm just not seeing it. So I'm not a fan of it. Call me what you will, question my theology, but that's how I feel about it. And I felt about that. I felt the same way about that since I was in K through 12 here in the United States, because I just didn't feel like I needed permission for somebody to tell me to pray or, worship or do whatever I wanted to do. I just don't need that permission from someone. That's also how I'm raising my kids.
Yeah. Yeah. it's definitely a yeah, it's forcing it down people's throats who might not want it, right? It's not really about your own faith or your own relationship with whomever it is
Mm-hmm.
that you worship, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
it's an idea. What's funny to me is that this whole argument around quote unquote wokeism and the left forcing this ideology of DEI on people, and we need to return to conservative Christian values, and we need to make sure children are learning the Bible in schools, and we need to make sure they know what the Ten Commandments is. Like, well, that's also an ideological position that you are now forcing on people, which is the critique that you are leveling against people you perceive to be quote unquote woke and DEI, right? So like the hypocrisy in that is just unreal, because they're not thinking that their position around um, Christianity as universal is an ideology. They're believing that is the neutral position, right? That
Right. The
is
norm. Yeah.
normal. Yeah. Right. So therefore, it's not an ideology. We're just returning things to normal. Whereas DEI, wokeism, whatever you want to call it, right? I hate that term wokeism. I think it's
Yeah.
problematic. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's the ideology. Critical race theory is the ideology, but
Right.
Christianity is not the ideology, right? That's
Right.
the piece that really gets me about
Right.
this. Is yeah.
Right. Right. And I find
So.
it extremely, I find it very hypocritical. I'm going to say it about my own community. I feel it very
Mm-hmm.
hypocritical that we are descendants of people who were victimized by portions of Christianity, then turning around and doing the
Mm-hmm.
exact same thing to other people and
Yeah.
applauding this in
Yeah.
public schools. That's problematic for me and my community. I'm just going to name it. It's problematic. It's right there. So forgive me for putting the dirty laundry out there,
Yeah.
but it's still dirty. It's not okay for me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's just so much hypocrisy, right? I mean, that
Mm-hmm.
is what is most irksome, and that's
Mm-hmm.
putting it mildly.
Ooh, look, we might have
All
the
right.
name of a
Well, I
podcast
think.
today.
Oh,
Irksome.
yeah. Yes, we might. I think we just unloaded on y'all, didn't we? With three phases that we got pretty passionate about there. So we will drop 1,000 links in the show notes where we're getting all this information, so you can follow all those rabbit holes if you want to learn a little bit more. But with that, Shaunna, let's wrap it up. Where can folks find us?
All right. Well, after we cool off from this podcast, this is where you can find us. Please don't hesitate to follow us, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Unfazed Unedited. I really like that platform because it does give you the transcription of the entire podcast as well, if you'd like. Please don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Certainly go to Instagram, LinkedIn, and of course, if you have questions, comments, concerns, send us an email, info@unfazedpodcast.com. And if you forget all of that, just go to our website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can access our new and also our archived old shows. But please, if you like this week's episode of us firing off at everything and everybody, please like it, subscribe, leave a review, and then, of course, share this with your friends, coworkers, and others in this phase of your life. So until next week.
See you next week, folks.